All right, folks, we're going to do a very simple program here. And even though we're talking about array lists, I just want to touch base with arrays real quick. So what I've done is I've created an array of strings. And you'll recall that the primitive data types are int, boolean, double, long, short, float, byte, all those. There's also the notion of a string, which is really just a whole bunch of letters, like a sentence or a name or a word. So if I was going to populate first name sub 0, I would write first name sub 0 equals Dave. And now I've stuck this string, which is actually an object. It's not a primitive data type, but it will stick it into first name sub 0. And I'm just going to hand code the rest of these. Okay, that looks good. And I did do Mickey Mouse because I want to show you that a string can have a space in it. A string can actually have any characters. I could have done all that whole thing is still one string, and it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It's a whole bunch of letters long. So I'm going to delete those. And my last line of code is going to be system.out.println the length of first names is first names dot length. Because recall that dot length on an array will actually count up how many elements there are, and it will return that. And actually, it's returning this number because we know that the string, the array of strings, first names, has to be 5. And even if we had deleted this, even if we hadn't run this, the length is still 5 because we've set aside 5 boxes for it. So if I run that, the length of first names is 5. All right. Now let's talk about ArrayLists, and I'm going to keep this code here just so we have it. So I'm going to comment, put a nice little line there so we can break it apart. You can also have an array list, and this is how you define what's going to be in it. All right, so let's look at this. So array list means we're making an array list, which is an object. It's a little bit more advanced than an array, and it's going to hold strings in it, a whole bunch of strings. And we're going to call it last names, and then you do new array list string. This is how you instantiate a class. So this whole line is an instantiation. We're declaring it, and we're setting aside memory to hold it. One of the nice things is, and you'll note that I did not give it a size. I could have said something like that, but I didn't, because you don't need to. You can say last names dot add. All right, so right now I only did 4, and it doesn't matter. We had 5 in the first example. We have 4 here. Absolutely doesn't matter. But I can essentially copy this line and paste it, and instead of first names, I'm going to say last names. By the way, if you've ever used a system.out.println to print out words, you've printed out a string because it has the quotation marks. So this right here is also a string. We just never had to define it. So getting back to this output, last names, and instead of dot length, we're going to use dot size. It's a little confusing, I know, and I'll show you a whole bunch of methods you can add, because so far in the array list we've learned dot add, which actually adds something to the end, and size, which will return the size. So it should say 4. I'm going to come back and talk about dot add in a minute, but let me compile. And I forgot that I do need to have those. And this is where I put the number in before I inadvertently deleted it. So I could say 5, 10, 15. Doesn't matter what number you put in there because you can change it on the fly. But you can also just create an array list of no size, and then it will automatically resize. In fact, I guess we'll talk about add right now. When you do the array list, which is in this case is last names, when you do dot add, it will add another box. So it was size 0. Now it's after this line, it's size 1, and in the first element, the only element, it says Gadoo. Now when we do dot add, it's going to add the word Smith. So now there's 2 elements. Gadoo is in 1, Smith is in 2, so on and so forth. So this code, when we execute it, should say the length of first names is 5, because that is 5, and the length of last names is, and it will get the size, which it looks to be 4. Let's see what happens. Oh, now we have another issue because we did not say we're going to use ArrayList. So it's cool in Java to use integers, doubles, booleans, all that good stuff. But you can't just start using all the classes in Java all willy-nilly because there's a lot. Let me show you. These are all classes in Java. You can see there's an awful lot of them. In fact, I'm only on F, and there's an awful lot already. So it's not cool to just start using any class without saying you're going to use it, because each class has a whole bunch of code associated with it. So you can import java.util.ArrayList. Now I just happen to know that in Java there's a class called util, which is utilities, and in utilities there's the ArrayList class. So I knew what to call. If you don't know, you're going to have to find out. You can look it up, and it's pretty easy. But maybe you're using more than one utility in more than one class in the util class. So you could have another import statement, or you can just say import everything in util. Now there's an awful lot in the util class. Let me show you. So we have all these interfaces and classes and exceptions, all sorts of stuff. So when you use java.util.star, you're actually importing the code for all of these, which is a lot, and you probably don't need them. It will ultimately decrease your performance because it's loading a whole bunch of stuff, and especially stuff you don't need. So if you just single out ArrayList, then it's only going to capture the code from ArrayList. And here's all the things you can do with an ArrayList. And it looks like a lot, but it's not. And I'll go over the most important one of these. So you can see that there's add all, clear, clone, a whole bunch of stuff. All right, so let's run this and see what happens, because I've imported the ArrayList class because I'm using the ArrayList, and I've defined an ArrayList that can hold strings. It's going to be called last names, and then I'm just going to add things on the fly. All right, first names is 5, last names is 4. Great. Let's go up here. All right, so I didn't have to, all I want to do is add one more to it, and so I'm going to compile. And now they're both 5. We can verify that because if we look at the code, we know that the string is 5 because the array of strings is 5, first names, because that can never change unless you, again, create another array and then copy all the values over. And the array list, in this case, happens to be 5 because there's 5 items. So that's how an array list works. So at any rate, that's how you add things to an array list. I do want to talk to you about the other methods, so I'll go over those real quick. Actually, what I'm going to do is create a method to output the items in the array list. All right, so let me just talk to you about this method. It's public, static. You're going to essentially need those for most of the stuff that you're doing. And I happen to be calling this method output array list items. You can call it whatever you want, but I thought this was an appropriate name. And I'm saying I'm passing in an array list, and it's going to be called temp list. So in the scope of here, I can do temp list dot and any feature that I want, and it's really affecting last names, because when I make the call up here, what's happening is, and I'm going to comment this out because we don't need that. I'm going to comment this out because we don't need that. So what this software is doing is, first it's creating an array, but who cares, we're not using it. It's going to create this array list that holds strings. It's going to populate them. Now it's going to call this method output array list items, and the parameter is last names. So I look at output array list items, and the parameter is an array list, and it's going to be called temp list. So in here, I can use temp list, and it's really affecting last names. In fact, I could call this A, and as long as I call this A, because we're passing in last names, and it's because we're passing in an output array list items, the object last names, the array list last names, that's what A is. But I think temp list is a better alternative. So I'm going to do for int I equals 0, I less than temp list dot size, because you use size for array lists, I plus plus system.out.print temp list dot. And if this was an array, we'd be like, oh, sub I, but it's not an array. It's an array list, so we have to use dot get. And that works essentially the same way. And I'm actually going to add a space so I can see, so it looks pretty. In fact, sometimes when I'm doing testing, I like to do a dash, because if it's a space and outputs 8 spaces, you can't tell. But if it's a dash and outputs 8 dashes, you can tell. All right, so let's look at this code. Let me run it. All right, Gadoo, Smith, Jobs, Law, Disney, and that works as intended. I'm going to, after we output that, I'm going to do last names dot add and I'm going to do 2 comma DeRusso. So the dot add makes sense. That just adds it right to the end. The dot add, when you have 2 parameters, a number and a value, is handy, because what this says is in index 2, insert DeRusso. Don't overwrite what's there, but insert DeRusso. So now I'm going to do output array list items last names. So again, declaring an array list, populating it with 5 values, outputting the array list, adding something in the middle of it, and then outputting the items again. So let's see what happens when we run that. Okay, so it's Gadoo, Smith, Jobs, Law, Disney, Gadoo, Smith, DeRusso, Jobs, Law, Disney. Now, that does look a little crazy because it's all in one line. So an easy fix is whenever we output the values, this will go to the next line before it comes back to the main program. So in other words, now if we output the array list, then it will output everything on one line, go to the next line, then it comes back here, it's going to add something, that's going to output something again. So let me see what that looks like. All right, in DeRusso, so this is 0, 1, 2, so it was inputting it right where we said. So there's a few different methods. We started with add and appends. Append is a fancy word for adding to the end. We also use .add with 2 parameters, the index, which is an integer, and the element. So when we use .add the first 5 times, it was appending it, and then the second time we used the method that took 2 parameters, an integer and an element. Now we don't use add all. I guess you could use clear, which removes all the elements from the. Now we'll compile this because I want to see. So we're outputting it, we're adding an element in the middle, outputting it, clearing it, and then outputting again. Who knows what's going to happen? All right, and it's tough to tell if something actually did happen because we cleared it. So and the clear method removes all the elements from the list. So we don't know if it really, we know that there's nothing in the array list. So there's a whole bunch. There's clone. Here's the ones that I think you need to know. And I'm just going to put these in comments at the end. So we could use last names dot add. You give it a number, also a name. You can do last names dot add and just a last name. You might care about last names dot clear. Notice that clear doesn't take a parameter. So right now we have a method called add that takes 1 parameter. We have a method named add that takes 2 parameters, an integer and an object. And then we also have a method called clear which takes no parameters, and that's fine too. You can also do last names dot get, and you have to give it a number, and that will return whatever is in object 3 or 4. If I did system.out.print line, and I guess I can write that here, system.out.print line, the value in position 4 is. So this line of code would look through the array list, which, and let's see, this is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and would say Disney. Well, actually, because we jammed DeRusso into there, who knows what happens. So position 4 would be, so this is 0, 1, 2, 3. This would be 4, but DeRusso is jammed in there, so now it should output law. Let's see what happens. And Gadoo Smith jobs law Disney, Gadoo Smith DeRusso jobs law Disney. The value in position 4, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 is law. Get is the analogous function to if it was an array. That's essentially what that's the array version of get. You can do last names.get index of. And so last names.get index of Smith, it goes through last names and it looks for the first occurrence of Smith, which is index 1, and it would return 1. There's a few other ones that are important. Last names dot is empty. It returns a Boolean, and it returns true if the array list is empty. You might be interested in remove. When I say removes, it doesn't just clear the entry. So if the array is size 6 and you remove it, it becomes size 5 because it takes out whatever's in index 2. You'll need to know last names.size, which just returns the size of the array list. And you might want to know about, I guess if we're doing this alphabetically, last names.set to. So add will insert an actual box, an actual element. Set, on the other hand, will actually overwrite whatever value is there. So set is similar to the add method that takes in 2 parameters, except instead of creating another box, it just overwrites it. So these are all the methods that you'll probably end up using in array lists. You might need 1 or 2 more of these, but in general, that's what you need to know about an array list.